Hello, welcome to Made Mill. This is Janak, Alford, CEO of Prototype D, and we are sitting in our innovation pod, and we're doing a really quick intro session here that is going to show you how we use the HTC Vive and the Google Tiltbrush to rapidly create designs and then turn them into models that we can 3D print. So Komi Olaf is steering the HTC Vive, and we're watching along. He's imported a 3D model that we downloaded from 3docean.net, and then he's scaling this model. This is going to form a foundation for a 3D painting, and he's going to be able to literally paint the fashion design for this model. We're then going to be able to take that design, import it into Blender, and start to be able to fabricate and solidify his sketches into real 3D models that we can then print out on our Tinkerine or our Fortis 450 printer. And this is really exciting because within just a few minutes you're going to be able to see him mock up a design, and then I'm going to take over in Blender and start to show you how you can fabricate a design. So within just a few minutes we can go from a concept sketch to a real piece of fashion. I'll then show you how to render that piece of fashion and get it ready for showcase as well. And the idea here is we're sitting here outside the Rideau Center. This is, of course, the fashion district. This is the heart of the retail district in the city. And we thought that this would be a great example on how next generation designers can utilize things like the HTC Vive and virtual reality, as well as open source software, to rapidly develop and come up with their own fashion lines. Partnering with a fabricator and using new technology like 3D printing, we can also start to look at how we would create this fashion and be able to roll it out and put it online so that your new fashion line is able to be purchased online, fabricated locally, and then shipped directly to your customer. So in the Tiltbrush, Komi is using the paintbrush tool, and he's moving between different colors and different brush styles, as well as changing the size and the texture of these brushes. And he's able to work off of this model and then build up an innovative new design here. Now, this is this model he has is he's scaled it to be his own scale in 3D. And you'll see that the brush strokes here are, some of them are going inside of the model, some of them are just floating out into space. But using Blender, we can fix this up after the fact to make sure that whatever gets fabricated would actually fit on a real person and is to scale. One of the exciting things about using Blender, which is a free and open source software, is it has a lot of modifiers, and it uses what we call a Modifier Stack to be able to take each of those brush strokes individually and to be able to give them thickness and form, and then be able to use things like the wireframe effect to create these really delicate frameworks or laceworks, and then use something called a subsurf modifier, I should say. And that subsurf modifier gives everything a very smooth and organic form, and looks great on a 3D printed model. Now, if you've been around the pod and you've seen some of the designs that we've done, using the 3D printed hand that we showed off a couple of weeks ago, you'll see how that subdivision modifier is able to create nice organic shapes. Now, each of these brushes in the tilt brush has their own look to it, and he's painting with light, and he's painting with everything from paper to duct tape to oil paint and ink. Now in Blender, when we bring that in, those are going to be just solid either volumes or faces, they're called. And then we can start to work with that, add our own colors, and pick up on the inspiration that Komi's created here to again continue the design and innovation process. And one of the interesting things when you're in a virtual reality environment, you can scale the model that you're working on to be able to be life size or very miniature, or as large as you want. So if you want to move in later and do intricate details, then that's really easy to do. Little earlier we were doing jewelry, and we were doing different forms, and it's just a great way to be able to use virtual reality to scale and develop every single part of that model. And he's going to use the toon brush. And what's very interesting about the toon brush as well is it creates not just a flat surface, but if you think of it as a kind of tube volume. So what he just painted right there would be very easy to select that shape and move it into the Tinkerine software and prepare that for 3D printing. So that could be a custom set of bangles that he's creating, and could be very easily fabricated in the plastics that we use, or you can upload it to shapeways.com, have it printed in sterling silver or gold or glass or ceramic, and so the variety of materials that you can leverage for 3D printing is really dramatic, and we're going to show you how to do that in a few minutes, and then add some really interesting modifiers to make that material, or to make that form he's just made really pop depending on the material that he uses. So he's just exported that sketch, and I'm going to switch over and take this model over from Komi, and now we're going to move that into Blender. Alright, so pause the audio for a sec. So right now we've just stepped into Blender, and we're going to be importing Komi Olaf's sketch here as an FBX file. So this is the native file format that comes directly out of the Tiltbrush, and this should be the model here. So you can recognize right here at the dress that he's created. So I'm going to delete the standard cube that comes from that. Now that we can explore what's going on. So if you'll remember, just a few minutes ago, he was drawing that bracelet, and I'm going to show you really quickly on how we can explore how we would fabricate that bracelet. So there's a few things that we can do. So this bracelet and each of those different brush strokes becomes its own object in Blender, which makes it really easy to think about fabrication. So right away I can bring this model over here, and I'm going to move it onto its own layer, so that we can focus on that and not look at the dress. And I'm just going to spend just a few seconds exploring how we could get this model ready for 3D printing, and start to explore how it could be fabricated. So I'm going to put the cursor to the middle of the selected object, and I'm going to put the origin to the 3D cursor, so we can rotate that object around its own axis. We look at it on both sides, and then we can start to go in and start to add some of those modifiers that I was talking about. So the first one that we sometimes like to do is a really interesting one called the Wireframe Modifier. And then what that lets us do, and I'll show you here in Cycles Render Mode, what that lets us do is see it as a kind of framework structure. Let me just turn on our environment here. I'm going to select that again. I'm going to turn on our Pro Lighting plugin, add a background and even a floor surface here, so we can see what it would look like as if it was kind of on a showroom here, something like that. And I'm going to turn on render mode, and we can quickly start to see that, and we can start to play with that wireframe effect here. So I can thicken that wireframe up like that. And what you see is the wireframe is it creates these really interesting mesh frameworks, and you can see the strokes start to take form like that. We can continue to thicken that up to the point where you would fabricate it out of a material. And of course you don't have to use this, but I'm just showing you one of the ways that we can work with modifiers to do something quite interesting. I'm going to give this a glossy effect here, so we can imagine what it would look like if it were a metallic, for example, and affect the roughness here. So we'll start to give that a metallic look while it's rendering right there. And now what's interesting is we could take this, upload it to Shapeways, or put it into our software, and begin to 3D print this geometry, either the way we see it here as a mesh, or we can even take that off and print it as a solid object as he's drawn it right there. So it has an interesting metallic look to it. I'm just going to change our samples here so we render up to a little bit of higher quality and adjust some of our render settings. And very quickly, I'm just going to take this object and I'm going to select it. And I'm going to do a quick export as an STL file just to show you how we could bring that into, as a bracelet, bring it into Tinkerine. I'm going to hit export on that. And I'm going to minimize some of our things here. Close down the Vive since we're done with that now. VR Compositor. And then go right into Tinkerine here. Too many things open. There's Tinkerine Studio is right here. So when we go into Tinkerine's suite, it lets us take any of those STL files that we've developed and start to look at how we could 3D print them. So I can import that STL file and I can select the bracelet object. Oh, I have to make sure that when I export it here from Blender, I do selected object only, otherwise it'll bring in everything. So let me export that again, selection only. I'll make another version of that, come into Tinkerine, and I will import that, bracelet number 1. And then we can scale it. So let's say we wanted it to be about 4 inches across or 100 millimeters. We can then look at that and see how we would start to 3D print that as an object. And then we can also add some support material, which it has turned on, and select our resolution, select our infill, and then we can begin to slice that. And if all goes well, Tinkerine will turn on and develop a slicing path or a slicing pattern. And when it hits 100%, we can see how this would be 3D printed by the Tinkerine. So you can see it's building you a preview right now. And the green is our object. The gray is everything that's being built with support material. And that support material will allow it to be all 3D printed properly and not fall apart as you're printing it. So you can see, and then you can actually go slice by slice on how all of the layers would work and how it would fill up that object right there. So that gives you a quick preview on how you can take anything that we've developed in the Vive, how you can move it into a Blender environment, play around with the size and scale and material, and then imagine and then move it into something like Tinkerine Suite for 3D printing. Now right now I'm also going to switch back to the dress, so that's what we originally designed here. So I'm going to come back here. So this is the dress. These are the elements of the dress that Komi was able to paint. I'm going to select those and put some light on them here. Set subject, and turn the light on. So those are all of his brush strokes that he had previously, and just gonna turn that off, turn it back on. Set subject. I'll move our floor down back under the model, scale that up. I'm going to hide our bracelet for now because we don't need that. We're going to look at the dress, and then we're going to see what we can do with this dress in Blender right now. So as you can see, those are all of his brush strokes that we had, and those brush strokes are just two-dimensional surfaces right now. So in Blender, we can start to give those thickness. And just for reference, I'm also going to import the model of the woman that he was using, so we can have that that same basis here. And we just need to get the scale the same, so the woman's probably significantly scaled up here. We'll scale that down to make it match. And go into our mesh mode. Select that mesh. I'm going to go into edit mode very quickly here. And set the origin here. There we go. So there we've set her back and scaled into the dress that was designed before, more or less. And now we can start looking at how we would start to solidify that dress and make it ready for printing. So here's where we can select the different strokes and the different layers that were created. So each of the different, every time Komi changes the brush in Tiltbrush, it creates that as a separate object. So there's that really intricate neck piece that he added to the back. We can start to adjust those things individually. And then we can also start to add some of those modifiers that you saw earlier. So I'm going to step back here. We can start to solidify these objects. And then we can also start to use things like the wireframe to make that there. And then I'll select the front part. And we can also start to add some colors and textures to this. So let's say we want to get this to pop. We can have some red there, and we can mimic that here on the oil paint. Say we want a red front to it, and then we want this this neck element here. We could even get ready to do in an interesting fur. So I'm actually going to call that fur. So we can do that later. We've got a solid piece across the back. And I'll do some of these strokes in a different color as well. So let's set that up so it's using a yellow. We'll see it in the viewport here. Doing a bit of a yellow color. And then that forms the basis of the dress design. So now we want to go through and start to solidify this dress, so we can start to add some of those modifiers again. That's going to give it structure. Now, as we mentioned before, these are two-dimensional strokes, so that wireframe approach is going to let it have structure so we can start to fabricate it. And here I'm going to solidify this piece as well. We can do a subsurf modifier. So we start to get some really quick and interesting different textures as we're developing that here. We can play with that live time and see how it's going to look. And then for the necklace, I'm going to quickly add a fur particle system, a hair system, 0.01. I'll do 0.1, make it spiky. You can change the number of particles there. You can make that pop, or we can actually leave it white, see how that looks. And we can start to render all these things together and explore the what we've just come up with. So there we have that that framework, that intricate framework across the back. So something very sci-fi and industrial, mixed with something that's perhaps a bit softer around the neck, and then we have the long flowing elements. And we can see how that's starting to shape up. And all of this, the whole model, including the woman, we would start to be able to look at being able to 3D print with our Fortis material. Now there's a lot of elements here that are free floating, so unlike the bracelet, due to the intricacy of it, we would look to use a printer that has support material. So as it builds up the layers, anything that here is floating, it wouldn't be affected by that due to gravity. So I'll just very quickly set this up as a render, so we can do a quick render here. I'm going to set up the model so that we have a different material here. I'm going to make it a bit glossy, like it's in a showroom, and put a nice tone to it. And I'll set up a camera and set up my render settings here. So we're rendering this nicely. You can brighten the background so that the model pops out a little bit. And bring up the color of the background. We can play with our lighting options on the model here. So if I select that model, See what's going to stand out. And then we can hit render on this, and in just a few minutes we'll have a high quality render. So there you see, in just a few minutes, in probably less than 30 minutes, we started with some concept ideas within the HTC Vive with an artist working on the basis of a model. Then we moved into Blender. We were able to start to look at 3D fabrication. This bracelet here would, for your reference, would cost about $2 to print in plastic. I'm sure it probably cost over $100 or more on Shapeways to print in metal, but you can use their online estimating tools to figure out exactly how much that would cost, which is fantastic. And then we stepped into Blender to start to give form and thickness to all of those different strokes, and start to explore very rapidly on how we could solidify this and prepare this entire dress to be 3D printed. In future steps, if you want, you could also unwrap these shapes, which would allow you to make cutting patterns as well, so that you could cut with scissors or cut out with a laser cutter, and then actually start to sew some of these things together. So those are additional steps that we can explore in the future, but I hope this has been an interesting opportunity to explore how we use virtual reality and open source software to rapidly develop proof of concept design and move them into 3D and 3D fabrication. So thank you for following along. Feel free to ask any questions in the comments, and we will be happy to answer any questions you have. And as well, check us out at MadeMill at the Innovation Center. We are going to be opening our shop up there in May of this year, 2017, and we look forward to working with you and developing your ideas into the real world.